It is 12:48. And you know what? I sometimes think we don't know what we are going to face. Well, we don't with the coronavirus. We have new stories all the time. And the one that has grabbed the headlines is the fact that there's this new variant of the coronavirus. It has me wondering, should we be concerned? What about the vaccine that's out there right now? Is it going to be effective in protecting us? I always like to turn to Dr. Raywat Deonandan, epidemiologist, associate professor, faculty of health sciences at the University of Ottawa. Dr. Deonandan, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I think because we live in a 24/7 news cycle, we hear almost too much information too quickly. But when you heard about this new variant of the virus, what were your thoughts?
My first thought was it's just one more mutation and it's going to last one news cycle and go away. But I was wrong. This actually is a bit more troubling than I originally thought.
And why is it troubling? What's your concern?
Well, it is more transmissible. Now, originally that was unclear, but some additional analyses done these past few days confirm that it is likely maybe 56% more transmissible than the dominant strain. And while it's probably not more lethal, the fact that it can infect more people means that more people are likely going to be hospitalized and die if it becomes a dominant strain. So our hospitals are already at the breaking point, and this has the potential of really stressing them further. So I'm a little worried, yeah.
Go back to even more transmissible, because I've said it a few times. We hear it on the news all the time. How do you define more transmissible?
Right. So the way it's being defined epidemiologically is the likelihood of an infected person passing it on to a secondary contact. So an analysis was published by the British government a couple of days ago looking at comparing the new variant with the existing dominant strain. And they found that if you are infected with the SARS-2 classic, as I call it, you've got about a 9.8% chance of passing it on to a secondary contact. But with the new variant, it's about 15%. So it's 50% more likely that you're going to pass it on to somebody else.
All right, that's something to be concerned of. So all the more reason that we continue to wear our mask and social distance, or do we even have to look at those measures?
So that hasn't changed. What we have to do as individuals does not change. We know how to minimize transmission. That is to keep your distance from people and to stay out of homes and buildings that you should not or need not go into because of aerosol transmission. So wear your mask, keep your distance, and do not expand your bubble if you don't need to. Now, with this new variant, if it becomes a dominant strain, we may have to consider some more extreme measures like closing all schools, because there is some data that suggests that it is even more likely to transmit amongst children 0 to 9 years old. That's unclear, but some data does suggest that. If that's the case, then schools have now become more of a pandemic acceleration threat. So, but as individuals, our job has not changed.
I want to talk about the vaccine as we watch it roll out, and there's been criticism that maybe it's not rolling out fast enough. I kind of expected that criticism. However, do we have to be concerned that this new variant will not be impacted by the vaccine, that we won't be protected from it?
That is always the concern. However, all signs so far point to the vaccines still being effective. I liken it to identifying a license plate, because there's a protein on the surface of the virus called the spike protein that all the vaccines train your body to identify and attack. So in the new variant, the license plate has changed a little bit. It's like a little smudge on the corner of one of the digits, but you can still identify it. And so the vaccine should still work. Now, all the manufacturers are frantically trying to prove that next couple of weeks, but all signs point to yes. Keep in mind as well that the new mRNA vaccines were developed in 48 hours. This past year has been spent just testing and making sure they work. So that means if we get a new variant that is resistant to the vaccine, it just takes 48 hours to create a new vaccine and then a couple of weeks to manufacture it. So I'm not too concerned about the ability of our vaccines to respond to this mutation or future mutations.
I never want to compare coronavirus to the regular flu. The only reason I'm even bringing this up is every season when we get a flu shot, you'll hear the medical community saying, well, we're looking at the virus. This is the one we think, the strain that's going to come to North America. So is that same idea that the flu virus is always changing, similar to the coronavirus? It can change and become, as you say, a new variant.
It is similar to that. Like every year, there are a variety of flu strains that are circulating, and we have to predict which combination of flu strains will be the dominant ones that enter the North American environment. And we make our determination of which vaccines to invest in there. It's different now because there aren't as many strains of coronavirus floating about. And also, the new vaccine technologies are so much faster that it is highly likely that any new formulation we can get almost precisely right. Right, so there isn't the same danger of having a mistargeted vaccine. So I'm quite bullish on the prospects of COVID vaccines now and in the future.
What's your take on how things are rolling out?
In terms of the vaccine?
Yeah, in terms of the vaccine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not too pleased with how quickly it's happening. I think this should be a 24/7 endeavor, and where I live in Ontario, it's not. This should be all hands on deck at all times. It is our best bet to get back to some kind of normality quickly. And I think our goal should be 1 to 3 million inoculations per week nationally to get us to herd immunity by between March and July. If that's not the goal, then I don't know what is.
Raywat, you may not be able to answer this, but I always throw anything at you. I heard today Ontario is no longer going to reserve the second dose of the vaccine. Have you heard that, and do you understand what that means?
Yes. So as you're probably aware, all the formulations so far require 2 doses about 3 weeks apart. And what we're doing so far is only giving half of the doses and waiting 3 weeks to give the other half. But instead, it looks like we're going to give all the doses with the hope and expectation that we'll get a new shipment in 3 weeks to make sure that everybody gets their booster. I'm not a fan of this approach, but I could be wrong. There is no right answer here. I'm not entirely sure what to do because it is ultimately dependent on how reliable the supply chain is. If we can be rest assured that we will get sufficient doses in 3 weeks, then fine, do it. If not, then I would rather we reserve those doses to make sure that those we have inoculated get full protection. Now, 1 dose might be enough. We just don't know. The clinical trials were not designed to give us that information. So I'm a bit conservative on that front. I'd rather stick to what the clinical trials tell us. However, I could be wrong. And again, there is no obvious right answer here.
Yeah. And I can see the reasoning, but you're right. Because would there be concern that if you don't get it within that 21-day window, that even that initial one is ineffective? I'm wondering if 28 days would still be fine. So then hopefully we would get that second dose.
That's exactly the concern. Now, probably a couple of days here or there isn't going to matter, but we haven't got the data to tell us if you wait 2 more weeks or 3 weeks, will immunity really be compromised? We just don't know. And to my mind, it's not worth rolling that dice. However, if the decision makers are confident that the supply chain is solid, we will get more doses, then go for it.
In a perfect world, we would truly be able to close our borders like a New Zealand or Australia to a point. That's the difficult part of trying to contain this at the same time, isn't it? When we hear of a new variant coming from the UK, and I know Canada has extended to January 6th the ban on passenger flights arriving from Britain. But is that ultimately the only way we're able to say we've got to stop this latest variant?
It is an important thing to do, I think. There are those who argue that it's too late. The horses have bolted and the barn door should remain open, really. But I don't agree. Numbers matter. We have a handful of cases in Canada, and it is useful to keep it at a handful of cases. And if we have ongoing flights from Britain, we run the risk of reintroducing a number of new cases. So I think we should still be closing that flight option. The bigger question is, why do we have open skies at all at this point? I understand there's some essential travel happening, but recreational travel really should be discouraged in the midst of a pandemic. Yeah. Having said all that, I think the opportunity to really double down on the testing of incoming travelers is present, and to enforce quarantine. I think the need for that is quite dire now.
Dr. Deonandan, thank you so much for your time on this.
Thank you.
Dr. Raywat Deonandan, an epidemiologist, associate professor, faculty of health sciences at the University of Ottawa.